You may have seen a moment like this before. You sit down next to someone you care about. Maybe you give them a hug, maybe you start a conversation, maybe your attention simply shifts away for a moment, and then your dog appears. He nudges your hand, steps between the two of you, places himself right in the middle of the interaction. Some dogs bring a toy, some paw at a leg, others suddenly become much more interested in being noticed. And because the timing feels so obvious, most people arrive at the same conclusion. My dog is jealous. It certainly looks that way. After all, the behavior often begins the moment attention moves somewhere else. But dog behavior is not always as simple as it first appears, because what looks like jealousy on the surface may sometimes be something quite different underneath. And that possibility changes the way this entire situation begins to look. One reason this behavior is so easy to interpret is because of when it happens. The dog does not usually interrupt at a random moment. In many homes, the behavior appears when attention suddenly moves somewhere else. A conversation begins, a hug lasts a little longer, someone new enters the room, and almost immediately the dog becomes involved. Not 10 minutes later, not after the interaction is over, right in the middle of it. That timing feels important. And from a human perspective, it is easy to understand why. When someone appears only after attention shifts away from them, we naturally assume they want that attention back. The behavior feels personal, almost intentional, as if the dog is reacting to being left out. But timing alone does not always tell us why a behavior happens. Sometimes it only tells us when something became important enough for the dog to notice. And that distinction may matter more than it first seems. Not all dogs respond in the same way. One dog may calmly walk between two people and stop there. Another may place a paw on someone's leg. Some bring a toy into the middle of the interaction. Some begin barking. Others suddenly become playful and energetic for no obvious reason. A dog who was resting quietly a moment ago may now be moving around the room, seeking engagement. And then there are dogs whose behavior is much more subtle. They do not bark. They do not push. They simply position themselves where they become part of the interaction again. Perhaps they sit directly beside one person. Perhaps they place their head on a knee. Perhaps they stand close enough that they are difficult to overlook. At first glance, these behaviors can seem completely different from one another, but many owners notice the same pattern. The behavior often appears when attention is focused somewhere else, and that is exactly why so many people reach the same conclusion about what it means. The interesting part is that the behavior often begins before the interruption itself. Most people notice the moment the dog steps forward. The bark, the paw on a leg, the toy suddenly appearing between two people. But by then, the dog may have been paying attention for quite some time. Many dogs begin by simply watching. Their eyes move between people. They follow changes in body position. They notice where faces are turned and where attention is directed. Sometimes a dog who appears relaxed is quietly monitoring the interaction the entire time. Nothing dramatic happens at first. No barking, no pushing, no obvious attempt to get involved. Just observation. And that is easy to miss because it looks like the dog is doing nothing at all. But in many cases, the interruption is not the beginning of the behavior. It may simply be the moment when the behavior becomes visible to us, which means the decision to join the interaction may have started much earlier than most people realize. One possible reason for this behavior begins with a simple fact. Dogs are highly social animals. Much of their daily life involves paying attention to the individuals around them, who is moving, who is interacting, who is paying attention to whom. Because of that, a change in a social situation may be more noticeable to a dog than many people realize. Imagine a quiet room. Everyone is relaxed. Then suddenly, two people become focused on each other. A conversation becomes more engaged. A hug begins. Attention shifts in a new direction. From a human perspective, this may feel completely ordinary, but for a dog, the social picture in the room has changed, and that change may be what captures his attention. This is where the idea of jealousy can become a little misleading. When people use that word, they often imagine the dog thinking much like a human would, wanting exclusive affection, feeling replaced, competing for love. But in many cases, the behavior may be something simpler. The dog may be responding to a change in social engagement, a moment that suddenly became important, interesting, or relevant from his point of view. And that creates a very different way of understanding the behavior we see. This idea becomes even more interesting when we look at what researchers have observed. In one well known study, scientists explored how dogs responded when their owners directed attention toward what appeared to be another dog. Many of the dogs did not simply ignore the situation. Some moved closer. Some tried to get between the owner and the other dog. Some touched their owner or attempted to interrupt the interaction. At first glance, those reactions sound very familiar. They resemble the same behaviors many owners describe at home. Researchers suggested that these responses may reflect something similar to jealousy, but the study does not completely settle the question. What it clearly shows is that dogs pay attention to social situations involving the people they care about. They notice when attention shifts, they notice who is interacting with whom, and they often respond when the social dynamics around them change. That does not necessarily mean dogs experience jealousy in the same way humans do, but it does suggest that they may be far more aware of social relationships and changing interactions than many people once believed. And that awareness may be an important part of what we are seeing when a dog suddenly decides to join the moment. The next time this happens, try watching the moments before the interruption instead of the interruption itself. That is often where the most interesting information appears. Notice whether your dog begins watching before he moves. Does he suddenly become more attentive? Does he lift his head and follow the interaction from across the room? Does he start looking back and forth between people? Some dogs gradually move closer before they ever ask for attention. Others remain still, but their focus changes completely. And sometimes the dog seems to be gathering information long before he decides to become involved. These small details can tell us something important. They remind us that the behavior rarely appears out of nowhere. There is often a sequence: observation first, interest second, action later. When we only notice the final step, it is easy to miss everything that came before it. But when we begin paying attention to the entire sequence, the behavior often becomes much easier to understand. And in many cases, the interruption itself turns out to be only a small part of the story. Perhaps the most interesting part of this behavior is not what the dog does, it is how we choose to interpret it. When a dog steps between two people, demands attention, or interrupts a moment, it is easy to assume he is trying to take something away from someone else. And sometimes that explanation feels so obvious that we never look any further. But there may be another possibility. Perhaps the dog is not trying to remove affection from the situation. Perhaps he is trying to remain connected to it, not because he understands the moment exactly as a human would, but because he has noticed that something important has changed around him. The attention in the room shifted, the interaction changed, the social picture became different, and he decided to become part of it. That does not make the behavior less meaningful. If anything, it may make it more interesting. Because the next time your dog quietly inserts himself into a conversation, a hug, or a shared moment, you may see something more than simple jealousy. You may be seeing a dog who is paying close attention to the people around him, a dog who notices social changes long before most of us realize they have happened. And sometimes understanding that difference is what allows us to understand the dog a little better.